Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into one of those global dynamics that just keeps going, doesn't it? The
Mm.
U.S.-Iran conflict. Our mission really is to unpack why tensions spike so often, but also, why both sides seem to pull back from the brink of full-scale war. It's fascinating. And we're drawing all this from our source material today. Excerpts from U.S.-Iran conflict, tensions and avoided escalation.
Yeah, and it's crucial to remember this isn't like a new thing.
All right.
The source calls the US-Iran conflict a long and complicated power struggle. And if you look closely, it's really driven by this potent mix. You've got ideology clashing, those persistent nuclear fears, the proxy wars happening across the region.
Right, like supporting different sides in places like Yemen or Syria.
Exactly. That and this constant jostling for, who's the main influence in the region. So it's a pretty tangled web.
Okay, so that's the backdrop. And building on that, our sources then talk about more recent stuff, right? Specific points in, say, 2024 and 2025 where things got particularly tense. We're talking about things like Iran supposedly getting closer to weapons-grade uranium enrichment. That always sets off alarms.
Always does. Big alarms.
And then the actual attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria, often linked to groups backed by Iran like Kataib Hezbollah.
Yes, those direct attacks or proxy attacks are a major flashpoint.
And, you also see significant U.S.-Israel coordination happening, joint drills, intelligence sharing, all basically aimed at pushing back against Iran.
Hmm.
It really feels like all the pieces are there for a major conflict.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which leads to the big question. So why hasn't it happened? Despite all these sparks flying, the core idea from the sources is pretty clear. Neither Washington nor Tehran seems truly willing to go all the way to a full-on war. Tensions stay high, sure, but they tend to avoid that direct, large-scale clash.
Because the consequences would just be too much.
Exactly. The source really breaks it down. It's not just about military losses, which would be huge. It's about potential economic collapse for both sides. Think about a massive refugee crisis destabilizing the whole region, and then the very real danger of dragging in other big players, other allies. It could unravel decades of, fragile stability.
So it's a strategic calculation, not just about winning, but about kind of survival.
Well,
The cost is just too high.
precisely. The potential costs seem to massively outweigh any perceived benefits of total war.
Okay, that makes sense as an overarching deterrent. But surely there are hardliners, right? Factions maybe in Tehran or even D.C. who think the gains are worth the risk. How does the source material account for that internal pressure? Are there ways they signal or, step back without losing face? Diplomatic back channels, maybe?
That's a great point, and it's where the real nuance comes in. The source material acknowledges those hardliners exist, absolutely, on both sides. But the analysis suggests that the dominant voices, the ones ultimately making the call, recognize those devastating costs we talked about. So they engage in something you might call like controlled escalation.
Controlled escalation. So pushing the envelope, but not tearing it open.
Yeah, exactly. Pushing boundaries, testing reactions, but carefully avoiding that final irreversible step. This might involve indirect messages, maybe strategic leaks to the media, carefully measured responses to provocations. It's like this constant, very high-stakes dance. Each side is always trying to figure out the other's real intentions, their red lines, and importantly, their own limits too.
So like a poker game with terrible consequences for going all in, lots of bluffing, maybe small raises, but nobody wants to show their whole hand or push all the chips in.
That's a good analogy. It's like they're constantly threatening checkmate but pull back because they know the countermove would be catastrophic for everyone involved.
Right. It's this strange, almost paradoxical stability that comes from knowing total conflict would be mutually assured destruction. Maybe not nuclear, but certainly geopolitical and economic destruction. Makes you wonder if this is just how these big power rivalries work now. So, okay, to sum it up, we see this incredibly tense situation, high stakes, lots of friction. But direct, all-out war is deliberately, strategically avoided, mainly because the fallout would be, devastating for everyone.
And thinking about that pattern really forces you, the listener, to consider the implications. What does this kind of permanent brinkmanship tell us about how international relations even functions today?
Absolutely. It leaves us with a big question to think about. What does this pattern of high tension and avoided escalation really tell us about the nature of modern international relations and how major powers actually manage, living on the edge of conflict? Something to definitely mull over.